look like moving forward. Section 5 is the first section that starts to cover investigations. Section 5 specifically outlines the community oversight boards and independent policing auditors' authorities and duties when it comes to any complaints received from a member of the public. This is where we would tend to have the most amount of authority and investigative powers. It outlines first and foremost what the ACPD Office of Professional Responsibility will do in those investigations, and then how the independent policing auditor is authorized to participate in those investigations and what records I would have access to, and then what the Community Oversight Board is charged to do via the ordinance once they've received both the investigation report from the Office of Professional Responsibility as well as myself, and the findings that they can make as a result of reviewing those two reports, and the timeline for which they should make those reports available to the public. This is a chart to kind of visualize the workflow that I just articulated as it pertains to public complaints. Section 6 is referring to internal reviews. So these are investigations or complaints that arise from within the police department. For this particular area, our function is more of a review function than it is an investigation function. So we would receive reports detailing all of the internal investigations that have happened in a particular month. It would be compiled into what's called an internal investigation report. And then I would do a first level review. Both myself and the COB will have access to this report, I should point out. I will do a first level review and identify any sort of systemic issues or policy related concerns that arise from those IIRs is what they're called. And then I will complete a report that I will then pass over to the Community Oversight Board to review as well, and add any additional assessments of systemic and or policy concerns. Both of those reports will be public, and HPD will have an opportunity to respond to those reports. And also there is an opportunity for me to request additional information if there's a particular internal investigation that I think requires some further discussion or that we'd like to know some more information about. There's a clause there in F that allows me to make such inquiries, and that ACP would respond to those inquiries within 3 business days. The chief of police may also proactively invite us to collaborate on those investigations, even though it is not anticipated in the ordinance that we would have the ability to investigate these particular types of investigations. If there's one that is a particularly let's say high profile issue or something that the chief feels is in the public interest for us to engage more collaboratively in, the chief may invite us to collaborate on that investigation or give us access to that investigative file, which we would otherwise not have. We don't have access to the investigative file as it's written here, and we do not have investigatory authority. So we would be receiving a summary of all of the internal investigations for a particular month. This is a chart that reflects that workflow and the kind of way an internal investigation would work within the department. So kind of walks through who reviews it and at what level and when discipline is imposed, and how the investigation is closed out internally. And then underneath it is a workflow of after the investigation is closed, who would compile the report and who does the initial review. And then, as I stated, when I would submit that review to the Community Oversight Board. Section 7 is a particular place in the ordinance that I wanted to outline just to highlight that. Are we back online? Oh, there was a little connection issue there. Okay. So although the investigative authority that we have is explicitly for public complaints, there is also language in the ordinance that outlines particular types of investigations, such as criminal investigations, EOC, which are equal employment related claims, and Office of Human Rights complaints. So those complaints, we will have the ability to investigate in the same way that we investigate public complaints. The only difference is while there is an active investigation, be it a criminal one, an EEOC one, or a human rights complaint investigation, we would not have access to those records until it's concluded or until a time at which the county manager determines that it would not compromise the investigation for them to release those documents to us.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do they have standards around how long they take to do some of those? Because I could see how some of those could drag on forever.
I know with criminal investigations, not really. There are statute of limitations as to when, a charge can be brought against someone, but I think it depends on, some cases can go on for years in terms of investigating. I'm not sure that I could speak to human rights or EEOC complaints. I believe those are usually resolved in a much more expedient manner. We do have an EEOC expert here that might be able to say, I just don't want to throw out a number.
Right.
Much faster.
Right. You will have set for EOC. I know you'll have set timelines,
Yeah.
and that they will meet or exceed, as in stay on the positive end for the complainant.
Okay, because I'm not saying ACPD would ever do this, but if a police department wanted to stonewall you, they would just never close the case. So that's why I asked the question.
That's a good question, but just as a distinction, so none of these are being actually investigated by ACPD. They're being investigated by the other entities, with a caveat that sometimes there isn't already like a pre-established written protocol between ACP and the Office of Human Rights that I know of. I think my understanding is that ACP on their own took the initiative takes the initiative to turn those over to the Office of Human Rights to investigate. I suppose there could be instances where they get kicked back down to ACP and they're like, oh, this is okay for you all to investigate yourself, in which case I'm positive that we would have a timeline from ACP's end as to how long that investigation is expected to take. And I think in that instance, there might be more of a case for us to kind of collaborate in that way, since we already have that pre-existing partnership. But these are all basically outside entities. So think of it in the same way that you think of it when we have a critical incident and there's a criminal investigation underlying, then we don't touch that investigation until the administrative part starts. And that's when we're going to be involved in these cases as well. Once the administrative investigation starts, that's when we would be involved. And also an important thing to note here is that we are limited in access to these documents in the same way that ACPD. So they won't have access to this before we do.
So question, who does reference criminal investigation? So who would be doing those?
That could be the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. It could be the Department of Justice. It could be CERT. Yeah. Usually when there's an underlying criminal investigation within ACPD of an officer, I believe that their response would be to turn that over to CERT, just to give it a objective investigation. Make sure there isn't any, appearance of any sort of bias or variety. Any other questions?
Just for process, then, is this just a review, or are we asking, or should we ask for questions now? Just for process?
Should you ask for questions now?
Or do you want us to go through the review really quick?
Yeah, I'm going to review. If there are any clarifying questions about what is meant, I think that's helpful because members of the public might have those same questions. But I think after we go through the review is probably when we should have comments, if you'll have comments about particular sections. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So section 8. And also just to make sure we close out section 7. As I said earlier, we'd be investigating these in the same manner as we investigate public complaints. So full investigative authority on those particular types of investigation. Section 8, administrative review, use of force incidents. This is specific to use of force because we would be involved in any sort of use of force incident because they're all reviewed on an administrative review level. Every use of force incident is reviewed by ACPD in what's called an administrative review, which is, think of it as a step below an administrative investigation. When an administrative review is conducted, then it is determined whether or not an investigation is needed. So in this function, an administrative review is done. And this is not done through OPR, but at their command level. So an officer's like immediate supervisor would do the initial administrative review. And then I would receive the administrative review, and in that function, it's kind of a checks and balances. So I would review that. If it is determined that a administrative investigation is needed as a result of the use of force, so it could be a policy violation regarding the underlying use of force, or another policy violation that's identified within that administrative review. In either scenario, if an administrative investigation arises out of that administrative review, then we would be involved in that investigation in the same way as the other complaints that we investigate. This outlines here, starting in A, what is done in a use of force review, and then the workflow that I articulated. So here, the main thing is an initial level review to determine whether or not the officer's actions were within policy or not within policy, and then outlining what would happen afterwards. This is a workflow chart to describe what we just went over. Now, one of those use of force incidents specifically that we wanted to draw attention to is any sort of officer involved action resulting in death or serious bodily injury, as we referred to earlier. So this is when the critical incident response team comes in. This would involve an officer. This would be a situation that would involve an officer involved shooting. So this kind of outlines what the critical incident, what the definition is for a critical incident, who's involved in that. So the critical incidents response team, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, that's a review for the underlying criminal investigation. And then OPR and the independent auditor would be doing the administrative investigation, and the same kind of workflow would apply as described above. And then the Community Oversight Board would do their review in the same manner as described with public complaints as well. Starting in section 4, it talks about what OPR would do once, what their kind of protocol is in responding to an officer involved shooting. And section 3 requires that they notify my office within 1 hour of the event so that I can report to the scene and get kind of on the ground updates as to what's going on and provide those updates to the COB at the appropriate time. That would be a little bit later on, as we'll discuss here. But OPR also should be providing routine updates to me as well throughout that time period. I would also be receiving a briefing from the CERT team, which is the outside investigative team, to be kept apprised as to what's going on with the underlying criminal investigation. OPR will also then provide the Community Oversight Board with a briefing. So just to be clear, I would be providing updates when it comes to the administrative investigation, which will happen after the criminal investigation. And ACPD will provide the COB with a briefing as it pertains to the criminal investigation once the criminal investigation has been conducted by CERT or ACPD, if whichever is applicable. This section B outlines what my authorities are. As I outlined above, another thing that I would highlight is that I would be monitoring the real-time interviews of the officers, which happen within 72 hours of the critical incident. And again, notifying the COB of it once the criminal investigation is closed is when I would have the open flow of communication with you all as it pertains to the administrative investigation. Again, that's just to protect the underlying criminal investigation. Section 5 talks about communication with stakeholders. What's important to note here is that while a criminal investigation is taking place, that neither the COB nor the IPA would be sharing facts that are outside of the ACPD's public press release on the ongoing criminal matter, so that we're not revealing facts of the underlying criminal investigation in a way that would compromise it. However, understanding that the public is going to want to hear from an oversight agency in times like this, We are not precluded from disclosing information just kind of about where we're at in the process. An example might be just saying, we're being briefed, or the IPA has been briefed on this, we're awaiting our briefing, and just kind of where the criminal investigation is still ongoing, and we expect to begin our administrative investigation once the criminal investigation concludes. So just keeping folks apprised as to where we're at in the process, but not getting to the facts of the underlying criminal investigation is the main takeaway here. This is a workflow, again, that kind of outlines what we just covered as it pertains to officer-involved shooting. Section 9 talks about how ACPD defines their findings. So at the conclusion of an investigation, they're going to make one of the below 4 findings: sustained, not sustained, exonerated, unfounded. And then in addition, they may note some additional findings that are outlined in section 5 regarding policy, training, recommendations, so on and so forth, or recommendations just about the officer's well-being generally. Section B covers what an administrative review finding is defined as, which is what we discussed earlier, within or not within policy. So section A, administrative investigation findings, section B, administrative review findings. Section C covers recommendations and disciplinary actions, and what part of the ACP directive manual discusses how that is processed, as well as how discipline is actually imposed within ACP, the chain of command that it goes through before the chief would issue the final discipline. It also outlines that they have a grievance process, and also section E is the main part that you all would want to pay attention to, is that once the discipline has been imposed, the COB and IJ can assess the sufficiency of the discipline action that was issued, and then make recommendations to the chief related to the implemented discipline. And the chief would have to respond within 30 days in writing, stating their reason if they decided to decline or to implement their recommendation. So that's where you all would be involved. Section 10 talks about access to records. Again, just talking about the confidentiality and security of those records. And then all of the items in section B are the items that ACP would provide us access with, as well as the timeline is in B for how long they have to respond to any requests that we make for those records. Any sort of digital evidence that we'd be reviewing, be it body worn camera footage or any sort of reports and that sort of thing that are coming to us from ACPD, will be section 3 housed on evidence.com, which you all have credentials to. You will have access to these recordings and reports for a respective year, and it would expire on September 1st of the following year. September 1st was the proposal to kind of align it with the timeline for your annual report. So if you wanted to do a reflection or a pattern assessment or something of that nature of the investigations that you reviewed for the year, they'd still be on your evidence.com credentials, so you could review those even after you've closed out a particular investigation. Power DMS is the platform that ACP uses for their policies. So you would have access to the both public facing and internal policies, so that you can review those as we're making policy recommendations. Disciplinary records will be provided if at the conclusion of an investigation an allegation is sustained. The summary of that is that you would receive a report that contains all of the officer's sustained allegations for the past 3 years. And that would include all of the things outlined in this list here. And you would obviously take that into consideration after an allegation is sustained to determine what type of disciplinary recommendations you all want to make. Let's see, Section 2, I wanted to draw your attention to in terms of method of sharing data. just to highlight that these are all of the mechanisms of data that will be provided to our oversight agency for purposes of doing any sort of data analysis or assessments in that regard. So this is all housed in what's called the data warehouse, but it just kind of breaks down what the kind of subjects of that data reflect. Section 11, internal audits and review. So this basically covers when ACP does an internal audit or review, that they would then provide us with a copy of that within 30 days so that we can review it ourselves and, you know, address any issues that are set forth in those audits or reviews. Section 12 covers ACPD policies and practices. So if there are policies, practices, and procedures that we want to make recommendations on, that we can publish an analysis of that data in the form of public-facing reports. Section 13 covers budget analysis. We left the timeline a little bit flexible here because there's a lot of moving parts in a budget cycle, but essentially it allows us the opportunity to give input on both the current budget proposal as well as the previous and preceding fiscal years, and to also participate in budget work sessions, and then provide any sort of reports at the appropriate time. That's why that language is there, to just leave it general so that we can provide reports as consistent or as it corresponds to particular timelines.
To clarify, does that include how the budget's being spent as well as how much they're asking for or whatever?
Yeah. So how the budget is being spent would be kind of your review of the preceding year, you know, what they did with the money, and then what they're asking for would be your review of like the current cycle and then possibly future budget proposals. Section 14 covers policy and legislative recommendations, just the manner in which we would make policy recommendations. Policy recommendations are going to go directly to ACP, and they have to respond to those if they decline to implement any changes within 30 days. Legislative recommendations is kind of more of a collaborative workflow in the sense that we will, run legislative recommendations past one another and give an opportunity to provide feedback, but they don't have to be approved or simultaneously released or, be responded to. They're going to go through the regular county legislative liaison channels to be brought before the appropriate legislative body. Section 15 covers annual reporting, and this just kind of gives an outline of things that we might cover in an annual report and the timeline for it. And also just the obligation on ACPD to provide us with any sort of outstanding data for the previous year by March 15th so that we have enough time to utilize that information to publish in our annual report. Section 16 talks about ACPD's response to any sort of public reports. It's typical practice for an oversight agency to allow the police department to respond in writing. It promotes transparency and accountability, and really encourages the police department to respond to specific recommendations that we are making. And if ACPD does respond, they should do so in writing, and then we would release those reports simultaneously. So a member of the community would have an opportunity to review both our report and ACPD's response. If they are not going to respond, there are some places where ACPD has to respond, be it a disciplinary recommendation or a policy recommendation. But investigative reports, annual report, budget analysis, they're not required to respond. So if they're not going to respond, they would notify all parties within 7 days, so it doesn't delay publishing the report. Commendations, pretty self-explanatory. This is just when we receive compliments from the public regarding ACPD, which we will receive. We will have a platform to receive both complaints and compliments that we will pass those along within 5 business days to ACPD. Non-concurrent investigations is essentially an instance where if we think that an additional allegation, additional documents, additional witnesses needs to be explored in the course of one of our collaborative investigations. This authorizes us to have a non-concurrent investigation, which is essentially a parallel investigation, if you will, or an independent investigation. And we could utilize our subpoena power in this instance to get those additional, get that access to additional witnesses or records or what have you. If we think that the investigation needs to go a different route, and we brought that obviously to ACPD's attention first, and they're declining to follow those recommendations. So that's what we mean by good faith. So there has to be a good faith effort to participate with ACPD first. And then if that doesn't happen, this is what the process is. This is all pretty much verbatim taken from the ordinance, but we just wanted to make sure that it was highlighted in the MOU because this was a particularly important issue to the community. Last but not least, last two sections just cover annual review. So the initial MOU would be reviewed at the 1-year mark following the signing. And then after that, we anticipate biannual reviews of the MOUs to determine if any amendments are necessary. And severability is the last clause, section 20, that talks about if there are any provisions of the enabling ordinance that the MOU conflicts with, that the ordinance takes precedence, and that remaining non-conflicting provisions of the MOU would still remain. That is the summary. I'm going to kick it over to Julie to facilitate the conversation.
Thank you. While very substantive, we know that was a quick walkthrough. The changes since the last time we reviewed it were pretty specific, and I think we have a lot to work with in the MOU, but we want to welcome comments from the public and the COB before we discuss a vote. Accordingly, we again want to thank everyone for participating in this particular meeting. We've had consistent participation from the public in our meetings, but we recognize that's a donation of your time, and we're really grateful for input that the public has to help us steer our work. So if there are questions, either clarifying from the board or from the public or comments, we're happy to entertain that at this time. Let's hear from the COB if we have comments or questions. Charles, was there something you wanted to?
There's a few things, but I'm used to usually hearing from the public first before the board members comment, but it's you know how you wish to run the meeting. But I would put forward that usually we hear from the public first.
Great. We have had more time to review it, so I would do both. We will definitely entertain comments on the public's
I
comments.
mean, like I said, it's how
We give them an opportunity, COB members, to comment if there's anything that's that in the public comment that they wanted to
Right,
expand on
address.
or address.
Okay.
As
We take a
the
look.
public, the sole public, I don't have anything at this moment. I had not read the MOU before I came here this evening. So I would need to go back to that. I did read the ordinance regarding it, and there's lots of really interesting things in there that compare with my previous experience with civilian oversight of police. So I think I should just wait for a more appropriate time to make comments.
We are grateful for your participation, and I think it will ultimately, our work will be shaped by continuous engagement with the community, so that this is not your one golden opportunity to provide input.
I understand that, and I think that community involvement is so critical to the functioning of an entity like this that,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming.
it's not an easy thing to get that involved.
That is scheduled for the second half of our meeting tonight, so we'll be delighted for your input there as well. We do have some virtual attendance. If we have public comment from the virtual meeting.
We had one person sign up in advance for public comment, which I believe was Heather Kelly. So we could yield the floor to her first and then see if there are any additional members that would like to.
Excellent. Heather?
Hi, I'm here. Thank you so much for going through the memorandum, Mummy. I really appreciate hearing you describe all of the different important sections. I am the chair of the Criminal Justice Committee for the Arlington Branch NAACP, and we have the ordinance and its drafting, its editing, public comment has been a labor of love for our organization and our committee. It has been a tremendous opportunity for us to see the COB come into existence and then see how it has developed and all the work that has gone into developing this memorandum of understanding. And we know how much work has gone into it, how extensive the negotiations have been among the stakeholders, and we're grateful for that and look forward to the opportunity to work with the Community Oversight Board and the IPA and ACPD to realize what the ordinance intends for the community's role to be in policing in Arlington County. So a couple of comments on behalf of our Criminal Justice Committee about the Memorandum of Understanding. We think it reflects very well the great majority of what is clear in the ordinance. There are a couple of issues that we can see have been sort of I don't want to say watered down, but they don't, in our view, and from our participation in the process of drafting and the county board adopting the ordinance, that not all of what we think the letter and the intent of the ordinance is reflected in the memorandum of understanding, but we are heartened to know that we'll have an opportunity, and you will have an opportunity once the MOU is put in place and some time passes under this memorandum of understanding, that any wrinkles can be sort of ironed out as we go forward, particularly with the opportunity to review and amend the MOU in the future. So a couple of issues that we would like to mention. The limitation of access for internal investigations in ACPD. We don't think that the ordinance intends either in letter or in spirit to have limitation of access to internal investigations by the independent policing auditor. We're hopeful that in the future that there will be a more expansive understanding and reading of the ordinance itself. And the other issue that we have that we have a little bit of concern about is public reporting and the IPA's ability to report on investigations, both public complaints, investigations, and about the results of the larger scale of investigations. We do believe that public reporting is an integral part, a critical part of the role of the IPA and the COB. It is probably the most significant part of the COB and IPA's purpose, because the public really wants transparency in all of these processes. We have, we could go through and find a million different things to thank you for and 100 different things to ask you for further development of. But I want to close on behalf of our Criminal Justice Committee at the NAACP by telling you how grateful we are and how much we're looking forward to working with you to make this a robust process and facilitate your contact with our members. Our members are the community in Arlington, and I, as the chair of the committee and our branch, stand ready to assist you in any way that will make easier and smoother your start once the readiness resolution is passed. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Heather,
Oh, sorry.
we recognize the importance of your time this evening and your role on the committee, and hear what you're talking about when we're looking at limitations for information access, and also about the public reporting and the IPA role. So we hear your comments and we're grateful for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you.
May I say something?
Good evening. Thank you. All we have is your phone number. Can you help us?
Yeah, I missed the first meeting, and I sent an email saying I couldn't make it for medical reasons. My mom broke both of her wrists, so I had to go to the hospital. But what blows my mind is that, oh, sorry, my name is Sarah Mola. But what blows my mind is that the first things to come out are the race of the people that are committing the crimes before the actual details or anything else. It's not. It's kind of bouncing off of what Heather just said. They're not giving us the reason why. They're giving us who did it and what color their skin is, and it's troublesome. It's worrisome that that's more important than the actual crime, or where it happened, or why it happened, or who did it. And I don't know how this passes through media. I guess it needs something to report, but the details is what we need. It's not just skin color. It's it's what happened and why, and specifically where and at what time, and all that stuff. The details, everything's in the details. So it's just there's a lot of work that I believe that the criminal community needs to, the police officers need to pay more attention to, and actually disclose to the public more than just what color their skin is.
Sarah,
I don't know. Sorry.
thank you for joining us this evening. We have launched a public complaint portal for specific activity complaints, and we're very interested in a continuous review of policies and practices by the police. I'm curious if we can invite you to comment on the MOU, or if you have an interest in having a conversation with us on a sort of broader portion of our work as the COB, so that we can be sure we hear from all of our members of the public this evening.
Okay, I mean, I have a personal experience with police officers that was unwarranted. But I missed the first meeting again, so I don't know exactly what was discussed or what to keep an eye out for. But I think once the red light cameras got put in, I see more of them gathering in clusters, the police officers in their cars, clusters, and just goofing off, just hanging out like buddies. So I don't know how broad you want me to get.
Sarah, we appreciate your input. We do have a time constraint for specific public comments.
Sure.
So we invite you to submit public comment through the portal on our website. And we would be happy to discuss some of the elements of what you're talking about specifically at a different time. Unfortunately, right now, we do have to move through any additional public comments that we have so that we can get to a COB review and vote on the MOU. Thank you so much for participating.
Okay. How do I get a copy of the document she was reading from?
How can you get access to the document that she's reading from? It's on the COB website with our
Okay.
agendas and the public complaint portal.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Next up would be Lindley Mansella, who requested to make a public comment regarding clarification on the public comment process.
Thank you. I see thank you for the visual workflows of how a public complaint, what the process would be. But what I'm having a hard time understanding is that seems to be like a singular public complaint and how it would go through the process, and then at what point the COB would be able to provide a report on that to the public. How does that translate to overall patterns? Is that covered somewhere else? Or is the thought that only individual complaints would be reported on? Could you help clarify that for me, please?
I don't think at this time we're going to respond to specific questions about the process. We are looking for comment on the MOU, but I understand your question about the public complaint process, and we would be happy to follow up with you on that individually. Mummy, is there anything?
Yeah, I think if I understood your question correctly, though, you're asking about kind of where in the MOU it speaks to those specific processes. Is that correct?
That's correct, because I didn't see the connection, or maybe there isn't a connection. And if you could clarify that there isn't, that would be helpful too.
So a public complaint is going to come in under section 5, administrative investigation public complaints. So we, as the COB and the IPA, the oversight agency, will both be able to receive complaints from members of the public. There are various different mechanisms that you can submit those complaints in writing, anonymously, verbally. We're going to have an intake system portal on our website that you'd be able to submit those complaints through the website or individually to a COB member or myself. And then ACPD also has a mechanism for receiving complaints from the public through their website. Either way, when your complaint comes in, it's going to be investigated by ACPD and the IPA, myself. And then once we complete that collaborative investigation, then it goes to the COB to review, and they're going to review ACPD's investigation as well as my assessment of ACPD's investigation. And then they're going to issue a public report. So when an investigation is concluded, you're going to receive a report on the investigation from the COB. And then if ACPD chooses to respond, that response will be posted as well. And the COB would be able to, in their report, reflect on whether or not they agree with ACPD's findings, whether or not they agree with my assessment of ACPD's finding. And to address your question about the patterns and practices, that's kind of contemplated a little bit more in the policy recommendations. So sections 12 and 13. However, in each investigation, if there are patterns related to a particular officer or policy recommendations that the Community Oversight Board wants to address as a result of a particular investigation, you may also find that sort of information in a report about a particular investigation. But then in policy recommendations or maybe an annual report, you would get kind of a summary of what the kind of trends and patterns we saw within the department for a particular year. And annual reports are addressed in oh
15.
yes, I'm sorry. Is it 15? No, it's actually Yeah, 50, yeah, COB IPA public reports, and that includes annual reporting. Thank y'all.
So we may not report on every individual complaint because of the process and the findings of our individual investigations. I think that the purpose of the MOU defining our specific protocols as they pertain to interactions with the police will be distinct from visibility that the community can have over time as we build out more formal protocols for what the process of handling complaints is in terms of visibility of intake, processing, resolution, and whether or not we sustain findings of misconduct accordingly. So
She just replied, that answered my question. Thank you.
perfect. Thank you, Lindley.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to give public comment at this time? Hearing none, I will yield the floor back over to you, Julie, to take comments from the COB members.
Thank you. Do we have additional comments or questions from the COB members?
I have a couple of comments and questions. I don't know if it'd be more helpful to kind of go through, to kind of walk through the MOU. That way if people have questions in the same part, maybe you can take them there, or did you want me to go through all of them and then stop and then someone else do all of theirs? I don't know what would be more convenient for you. I'm open. Just start at the beginning and then I'll just say this section and.
I'm gonna invite the COB to participate.
Okay, well, then if we'll start at the beginning then, kind of just a general structure and comment question. Generally, I do like how it's laid out as far as one thing that is not there that I think we should look for in the future is kind of lay out some of the acronyms that are in there. And we kind of discussed that before. And it's just helpful that when you're in page 20 of this document and you're like, okay, I know CRT was there and bracketed at some point. Where is it? Having glossary section would be good to have there. And maybe even going as far as to have a few more definitions of what some of them are. Like, for example, we're familiar with the fact that one of the programs or one of the computer programs reference what it does. But even if I laid that out for the public, like, what is this? So maybe having some more definitions there. So that's something there. Moving into the heart of the document then, I don't know if there's any other general structure.
Is it still public? No, I was just going to follow up on something.
Sir.
I agree, I was starting to make the list because what you described is exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
And I know that I can go back and find it where it was bracketed, what the definition is or what it stands for there. But if there were just one page, like a glossary or whatever that had all of them listed, it would be really helpful.
Okay.
Probably online too for people.
I'd like to respond just in case this addresses maybe more holistically comments in that thread, which is that the MOU being a legal document between us and the police, we recognize that its structure and format is not a publicly tailored document. Its accessibility isn't as digestible as our reporting and our public processes will be. I think it would be important that we create similar documents, partly to address Lindley's question about, what do these processes look like? But creating the formal and specific legal interpretations is going to inherently be a little bit less transparent to the public in terms of the definitions and following through in that way. I wonder if we can focus tonight on the interpretation of the specific agreements.
Yes. Again, this is just a comment. I'm not saying that we should sit down here and write that out tonight. It's just a comment saying this is something that should be there and should be contemplated at the future revision of the document. But no, I have no intent for us to sit down and go through it tonight. If that's helpful. The next section then for just conflicts in that section 1. Just again, being mindful of wanting to make sure that participation in this body is as open to as many people as possible. We don't have too many issues there. I think, again, at some future date, we may want to take a look at some of that language dealing with particularly some of the onerous requirements regarding the financial disclosure agreements and conflict agreements. And this is a conversation that is going to actually have to happen more so outside of us, but to the board, and we have the opportunity to talk to the board. Definitely we need to make sure there's no conflicts, of interest that are apparent. But some of the requirements, I think, for board membership when it comes to some of the depth of financial disclosure, there is actually some leeway the county board has. Unfortunately, we've all of our committees, all of the committees have been painted with this broad brush, but particularly for ours, my concern is that because we aren't necessarily in a place where we're dealing with a lot of vendors or we're dealing with a lot of contract interactions, which would be more of a purpose for those type of detailed financial disclosures, that we may want to we may want to take the opportunity to think of other ways that we can ensure there's no direct conflicts. That's made apparent without the onerous, details of some of these full financial disclosures, which I could think that for some people we want to serve on this committee, they'll see something like that and be like, you want to know what about this? Oh, I'm trying to deal with, what's happening in the community, and you want to know my what I own, what I owed, and all that kind of stuff. That may be just a bit off-putting. And I think there's yet to be a committee I know that's actually addressed how this could be limiting to participation. And I know that that's something from other board members that they want to make sure committees, especially ones like ours, don't unwittingly put up barriers. That's the only thing I have with conflicts. I don't know if anyone else has that, but again, that's something I wouldn't necessarily have any language to take out right now. But that's something that should just be up there. I have no comment on section 2. On section 3, the IPA, just one concern is that there was not explicitly any role for the COB in review or recommendation of IPA candidates. Should we need one? I know, money, you'll be with us forever and ever. But should there come a day that a future board needs a new money, it would be nice if there was some.
I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
No, go ahead.
No, please.
I just stream of conscience.
Yes.
Sorry. No, please finish.
No, done in a sentence.
Okay. I'm wondering if maybe what we need to, apologies, but maybe what we want to be focusing on is, I mean, the MOU is about the agreement between the ACPT and the COB, right?
Mm.
And all your comments are absolutely spot on. I agree with everything, but it's sort of outside of the purpose of the MOU. Am I wrong? So it's not that I don't think these are good conversations. It's just that we could spend 3 weeks going through all the different things. And you're absolutely right.
The thing is,
what's the purpose of it right now?
I take your point, but it's there, it's on the record. And if we're here representing what the public may think about something, I'm going to talk about what the public may think about something, especially since, yes, I know the MOU wants to get someplace, but it has all this other language in it. And if it's not said now, when it's going to be said. It's not on the record now.
Some of this stuff is structural.
So
Conflict of interest. These are structural issues that the county, I mean, we're not going to resolve.
Can I please comment on that? I mean, these are good points, but here's what I took from this today is that we're going to review this in a year.
Correct.
And then we're going to go every 2 years.
Correct.
So everything you're talking about, I don't think you need to record them right now. They're good, but best thing that I think we're doing, we're getting and we got to get the input, but I'm looking for this next year. I mean, we're not going to, even if we add it all up, we're not going to have it right. There's going to be a lot of learning. There's going to be discovery. This next year, we're going to get rich. I guarantee you. I've done this
in
before.
knowledge, you mean
This
we're
is
gonna get rich
Not
in
not in money, but there's going to be other things pop
Listen,
from the community, from us. And so
not my first rodeo. I've been to the board like this
this
before.
next
I can read the room. We can call the question. I will vote no.
Yeah.
We can call the question. I will vote no.
Right.
If that's the attitude of the board, that's fine.
Charles.
I do understand that.
Okay, I want to say two things. One, we do have a really important conversation to have in the structure and formation of the board, things like selecting the IPA. There are really important considerations for the policy and practice of the COB.
Correct.
And we do not currently on our agenda have a specific opportunity for you to vocalize things like, I hear what you're saying, the financial disclosures on their face serve the interest of independence, but also have a trade-off of barriers to entry for a group whose explicit purpose is to engage participation from members of the community who are not structurally always welcomed, let alone pulled in. I don't think it's the attitude of the board that those comments are unwelcome or unwanted.
No, it's not. It's
And-
just now.
And if,
Some other date, and I
No.
understand that. You're just not welcome now. I understand.
no. What I'm hearing in your complaint, and I want to ask you if this is your purpose. If not now, the question is then when? And so the problem is that we don't currently have an agenda opportunity for the public to hear specifically on these things. And this is a procedural opportunity. Now, we deal with this as a group also in our dealings with the county and with the police. So I want to invite you to please continue with your comments if you think that they are more important here than if we are to schedule them for our next conversation as a public group.
These are the matters that are within the MOU, so I would like to highlight them now because they are in the MOU and they're read in the MOU now. Again, I can read and I will let you all know as a parliamentarian, any of you at any moment can call the question and we can have a vote on whether we just don't want to hear anymore, and that's fine. That's fine. I don't want to stymie the process at all if it's viewed that this is stymieing the process. But also to your point, though, when we get down to, oh, well, we can look at this next year. One of my comments is, well, as it's written, what it says is there will be an opportunity to review should there possibly be more language, which actually would explicitly force the question if we came to a situation where we're, for example, said, oh, well, the ordinance has changed a bit. We're actually empowered to do this. Let's make a change. If the language only says review at this point and doesn't actually say that we have to come back together and agree and sign off again. So if there's some sort of sunset on it, if there's some time limit on the document, technically you could have one group say, well, we reviewed it, but we really don't think so. And guess what? The MOU just keeps ticking along. So therefore, if that could possibly be one interpretation, do we wait and see, or do we try to see if there should be something in that provision where we would really sunset it and force all of us to have to proactively address all issues and vote on them again in a year?
So before we started this meeting, our consensus on the group's top priority was community outreach.
Right.
And I think that stays our top priority because it's the thing we have done the least of. The second top priority, if I had to guess, would be on policy review, including things like how much energy do we spend recruiting new candidates? We do currently have a law enforcement non-voting member vacancy. We have membership requirements. There are a lot of things. It's not my understanding that those authorizations are in the MOU. So where I hear what you're saying, because the language is here, this is the opportunity to make comment. The language that's here that you're referring to is by reference to other documents with other authority. So I would love to entertain the possibility that since the second half of tonight's agenda is programmed for outreach, that the first half of the next meeting be for policy, where we can entertain a specific review of these elements that have really foundational importance to the COB but they aren't specific to our draft agreement with the manager, the board, because like, for example, how we select the IPA isn't authorized within the MOU. It's actually, I don't think specifically in the ordinance, it's
It is.
implicit, it's in our participation in selecting the IPA is in the ordinance.
Yeah.
So there are externalities that have a really important need for our feedback before we go through our authorization.
Right.
Would it be constructive to put this at the top of our next agenda for policy review so that we can create in our policy subcommittee a priority of addressing those things where they have a more direct impact than this audience?
Can I make a suggestion? Charles, I think everything that you're highlighting is important. It makes sense. I think for purposes of time and what we're trying to accomplish tonight, I think totally your choice if you want to highlight all of the things that you have listed and just maybe invite discussion on any particular subjects that would preclude you from voting in favor of the MOU, because I think those are the key things that we want to address as a group. And for the public to hear that discourse, I think is really important. If there are stylistic things or clarifying things or things that you think we can enhance for an MOU 2.0, I think, up to you if you want to list those now and just, list them and maybe not invite discussion on them. Or if I know that you have your comments, probably organized and in writing, maybe you could send those out to the group and they can be our kind of we can create a working document where we are keeping track of revisions that we want to make in an upcoming MOU just to enhance it even more. And if those specific comments elicit any particular work around policies or anything like that, then obviously that would go to the respective subcommittee or something that you all might want to discuss in more detail as a group. But I certainly don't want to diminish your need to discuss anything that's going to keep you from voting in favor of the MOU. There are any topics of that nature. I think those should be priority.
I absolutely agree, and especially with being able to share fully written comments that I may or may not have had. Unfortunately, because of the rules which govern how we can share things, I'm limited in how I can share comments, which I may have written because they may elicit some sort of discussion, which we could not have online. So there are very limited circumstances by which I can raise these things and have everyone hear them at once.
Just to clarify, you all can email one another. It's just that you can't be in a document like a chat or open chat function that allows you all to chat simultaneously.
Right.
But you could certainly have a shared document in the same way that when I was drafting the MOU, I shared it with all of you all to go through it on your individual times and add comments. You can certainly do that or email the group if there was an article or, a Word document that you wanted to bring to folks' attention. I just want to make sure that it's clear that you all are able to communicate with one another in that way. The spirit of the public meeting law is just contemplated to not allow you all to have, conversation in a way that's not in a public setting.
I just say one last thing since I started this. So I'm really sorry, Charles. Nobody's probably the only one who knows I'm laboring under a migraine. So I'm not being my usual charming self, so I'm really sorry. I didn't say that well. But what I was trying to say is, Julie said it better, that there's an awful lot of things in here that we have to fix someplace else.
Right.
And for now, I would have, maybe the deal breakers are the things to focus on so that we can all agree on the MOU for now. Because the problem is if we don't agree on the MOU, if something terrible happens, we're not empowered to do anything about it. And that's the thing.
I would only caveat that we're not all here to agree on the MOU. We are all here to vote on the MOU. And Charles, certainly we want to always, in every meeting, and I don't mean to cut you off.
Yep.
I only mean to capture and reflect on the spirit of what you're talking about. I think it was Heather who talked about, the spirit and letter. And one thing we talked about specifically in the MOU negotiations with the police and the county is there's actually more to this than the spirit and the letter of the law. and the spirit in the letter of the agreement, which is that our hybrid structure was deliberately designed for conflict because that will bring us to the best outcome. We want to be in keeping not just with the original intent and purpose of the COB and IPA, but also national best practice, but also the local character and need and interest in law enforcement. So I hope you hear that. I don't mean to stifle your comments. I would like to make sure that we have ample time for deliberation on those comments. I don't think you're the only person who supports a lot of the issues that you're bringing up. I think that they are included by reference as language. So I'll turn it back to you if there are elements of the MOU relation to the police.
There, there are. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
Charles, you
I
know
hear
what? You were a good board member. You read the whole thing. You have 4 pages of comments. You know, you have a lot of questions. Hey, guess what? Ask only 10 of them right now on the spot. That's kind of how it feels. I know it's not the intent. That's kind of how it feels. Like, okay, just tell us these, don't tell us those. And let me say why I am a little stymied. One, you're asking a lawyer to kind of, you know, say less than. Okay, that's
That's all right.
two, it is similar to, for example, bringing up the where we all started with the, you know, with the acronyms. It's one of those things where part, I believe, of what we do and what our function here is to reflect questions and concerns that, again, the folks watching at home, and more likely the folks not watching at home who have the concerns, but just, you know, give it over to us to deal with them, would ask. You know, the things like, oh, shoot, are they even thinking about this? Hey, I can make tonight's meeting, I can make, you know, tomorrow's meeting. I know this is the MOU. I know this is the MOU thing, and so if I hear a question now, then at least I know they're somewhat thinking about this thing. So it's very hard for me to say, especially how I came to be a member of this body. Granted, you know, I'm the rookie on the all-star team, but how I came to be a member of this body, it's very hard for me to say, well, not this, but this. It's hard for me to do it tonight, even though I do recognize what our time limits are. What I can say is I can go through it without the depth. I can go through it, which I was trying to do with some of the question, you know, just general questions I had. But some of you may again feel that they are more questions on, you know, are we off our aspirations than they are on, is this, you know, something that is, you know, is this something that is urgent for, you know, for the particular moment, the MOU. I will tell you this, though, that they add up, these things add up. And I appreciate the, you know, we'll get him next year slugger. I appreciate that, I do. But in too many things, too many, dear, get him next year slugger, okay? Too many times. So at some point, you just have to be like, you know what? I know perfection should be the enemy of the good. But on this one,
Why don't we just hear them all?
Yeah.
I mean, let's just go, I mean, because right now we're just kind of circling the wagons. I'd just say, let's go for it.
okay. So conflicts, IPA we talked about, training. I think that was done very well. I think it was done masterfully. Again, folks at home, everyone around this table did just so much, you know, and I think how you were able to make it much more approachable by breaking it down is perfect. Because before that, I think it would, again, would have been a barrier. The administrative review and public complaint process. And this was clarified, and I thank the member at home for asking this, because my big question here is, I was under the impression that we actually were more so going to have two different, almost one that was kind of more unique to our COB if they submit a complaint, but it's kind of seems as though it's more of a funnel. You know, that we're introducing a new method to bring it in, but it really all does funnel into the same process. And I'm just hopeful, though, that and this is a question, I guess it's just with the vendor we use, if we'll be able to collect additional information that maybe the police can't, because we'll have a different vendor. That's very important. And I think it goes to the heart of trying to figure out patterns. And we'll be able to have that information. So that was just a clarification there. There was something about on this one I can, this was something that was in the ordinance. Again, it's just this, some things that you may do and some things that we shall do. This is within that same IPA-COB complaint, funnel process, and just sometimes you're given the ability to decide which complaints to look at, but some we actually always have to look at, if you understand what I'm talking about, that section. And there was just some.
So we're tracking, can you say what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry.
trying to keep up.
Sorry, I'm at the administrative review public complaints. This is pages 7 through 10.
Okay.
And I'm specifically on page 8. And I'm looking at section B and section C. And the book, section B starts on the IPA may. And it talks about the different investigations the IPA may do. And you'll see in section C, it's what the COP shall do. And I was hoping that we could actually empower more language, but again, this is one of the things, Julie, that you talked about was, I believe, rooted in our ordinance, correct? So that's why this one has to be the way it is, but I'm hopeful that again is something that we can adjust later. One thing that this timeline, again, in the same section, in the same page, looking at page 8, it says we have this 30-day notice requirement, and and I'm just, again, wondering if we could do better in figuring out which things have to have this 30-day notice to the police and which ones don't. My concern here is, are we slowing down our ability to report out to the public if we have to give the police 30 days on items? And is there a way that we can be very specific about which ones we can do 30 days is fine on, and which ones aren't? And is 30, I know, Mummy, as you were explaining it, you said 30 days is industry standard, but it seems as though because they actually have, I'm sorry, with reference to that 30 days, specifically if page 26, section 16 is where we talk about having, giving the ACPD an opportunity to see different, it was called, I think it's just reports, 30 days. But because we don't specifically name the type of reports, I just don't want to run into a situation where some things that we don't necessarily consider reports are, because we're reporting out, like, for example, maybe things that we would issue to the board. Because it's reporting out, it may be construed as a report, even though it's not on its face an annual report, if that makes sense. And if we have to give those things 30-day windows, then, is there any way we can, that just number seems as though it could trip us up. And especially when I think about things like for example, our annual report, September 1st really means if you have to give a 30-day window, that annual report has to be done 30 days earlier than that. And, is that, again, a realistic time frame for what we need to do? And also on that end, I'll talk about later, September 1st, a realistic time for an annual report. If August is usually a time that a lot of people aren't here. By that, I mean, we have a lot of public employees, a lot of private volunteers. August is a month. They're not here. So would that actually long-term stymie our ability to make sure that that September 1st document is what we want it to be? And maybe there is a better date than that. But again, there's this term used sometimes when you try and fail, is it? Or I forget the name of the term. Trial, right? Yes, the trial. Yeah, the trial. Maybe this is one of those trial and error September 1st. And maybe that 30-day thing is something that's trial and error too, and see if it becomes a stumbling block for us. Continuing to move down. We've already actually discussed this. It's the administrative investigations processes, page 10 through 12, section 6. That's the administrative investigations internal review process. And and my question there was just a little bit more about the advantages and disadvantages of the access we had to evidence.com. And again, I understand that the ACPD has us at the year, but I do believe, and I'm very disappointed that we could not move ACPD off that in this instance. this again is one of those things where I'm saying, guys, you know, that whole wait and see stuff, man, that's, I mean, some things you just gotta, push on. I know we pushed on our end. I'm disappointed that we weren't able to, move deeper on that. That is very concerning for me when it comes to being able to vote yes to this.
Please make sure that you're letting us know if there are any areas that you particularly want to have discussion on.
Oh, I thought I had to go, oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had to go through.
Oh, yeah, but if there are any particular topics that you think we need to have more collaborative discussion on in order for you to feel comfortable with voting, then please flag those.
Yeah,
issues.
I mean, the evidence.com would have been one, and I mean, you've said that, you know, it's the best we can do. I don't know if there's anything that can be said. I know that we tried as a board. I mean, this is just something that is just absolutely disappointing, that we fell short. And I don't know if maybe there's more that can be discussed or said on this.
Can I ask a question? My notes, this. So we review this every year or 2 years, but you don't have to re-sign it. Right? It's just like, maybe the solution is some kind of agreement that in a year, we have to technically renegotiate it and that everybody has to sign it again.
I think that is the intent of the,
That's what I thought the intent was, but it's not spelled out.
And that's what I said in that section, that's the intent, it's not spelled out, and that's again,
Okay.
very troubling.
so
because
we don't have to sign it tonight. The purpose of our signing it tonight, or the purpose of our calling a vote on it tonight is that, well, I think there are several provisions, but for example, many of our terms expire in September. And so if we were to proceed without a readiness resolution and get off and get into our outreach and our policy reviews and our discussions of the membership requirements, for example, which I think you've raised really important elements about barriers to participation. If we lose voting members, the ordinance is very clear that we have to have a physical quorum to conduct activity. If we lose a bunch of our members and we have to retrain and we don't have a readiness resolution, it puts us at a disadvantage. I think there are operational issues within the community that come up that can't be addressed without the readiness resolution. We, I think, have had a couple of different conversations about the benefits of withholding readiness resolution so that we can get where we want to be. I think that the police would say they have yet to be desires in this, and so do we. I think they're really important that we address and be comfortable getting to each of the things that you're talking about. To Mummy's point, if we want to have substantive discussion on specific interpretations or provisions affecting your ability to vote yes on passing the MOU, we can certainly do that. I hear a lot of really important discourse in what you're bringing up. I don't think that all of it has to wait until next year to be addressed. And I think that there are policies and protocols we will put in place amongst the board in the interim and like the next month and the next month after that. So I don't mean to be dismissive. I also don't mean to stop you. I think
No,
it's important to hear from you.
Because the point that Lisa brought up, though, is one that again would make a yes a little easier, because you know that, because right now we're crossing our fingers on this, you know, that we're gonna come back in such a way that the ordinance is gonna be passed in such a way. I mean, again, the ordinance in of itself.
It's not lost on me that our mission is
Right.
promote and increase trust. That's an immeasurable quantity amongst ourselves with the
But
police.
a lot of it's predicated on the ordinance, for example.
Part of the reason to move forward is that the only way to build trust is through action.
Right.
And we can sit around this table and discuss forever, and then we will lose the trust of the public and our ability to participate because we won't be authorized to do the work that they need also. I'm not saying any one specific thing is more important than the other.
I take your point.
I hear you that our ability to trust each other and the agreement, it's not a legally enforceable document. It's our implicit protocol on how we're going to operate with the county, with the police participation. It is a starting point and it should be the best we can do. It's really hard to say where we should start and what is the best we can do as a starting point. I don't disagree.
We didn't have a lot of public comment tonight, but specifically, I appreciate the comments you made and also the other woman, I have her name written down. But both of them, I think, expressed there's still some stuff undone. But I got this sentiment that we got to get on the train tracks, ride this train, and that we've got a lot to do together, AKA the community involvement.
Mhm.
Our plan, I think, is sound. If we don't get to that, and I'm not telling us just to kiss this off, but I'm just listening. I listened to the great input and the great input from I think both of the public commenters were very good, but I got this sentiment that we're in a good place, but we got work to do.
Yeah.
Did anybody else get that same sentiment? So I'm kind of feeding on that, not my feelings. I'm receiving, and I think this is all good. And yeah, that's all I want to share is let's listen.
You still have a captive audience.
No, well, Lisa raised an excellent point about one way in which I think the people who may also have the reservations I have in the community would feel a little more at ease if there was some clear language that we would have to all come back and sign a agreement in the future. Now, and when you're saying that part of that complexity is, will some of us be, well, we don't have to rewrite our ready resolution when some roll off and some roll in, right? We are ready in the first instance, and then we are perpetually ready, right? You're perpetually, right, as a body. So I thought that was one reservation you had, is if we didn't get that.
In order to stay ready, we have to have 5 trained voting members.
Right.
And the training is a substantial commitment.
Right.
And should we lose somebody at some juncture and not be able to replace them in a timely manner,
And that's
reopen a lot of doors.
Yeah.
Which
But
gives
you're
us
saying that-
opportunity for process improvement. I don't want to be
Do we have
prescriptive.
a chance for, do we have, and this is kind of, do we have a chance for language that can be more explicit about how we come back?
So the annual review language. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Can I answer this one?
Sure.
Sorry. So first of all, just to reflect on the annual review language, which is on page 19. Or section,
No,
sorry.
section 19, page 28.
Page 28, okay. So the understanding here is that if any amendments need to be made, that a new MOU, the MOU has to be revised and re-signed in order for us to address those amendments. Or if there is a change in the ordinance that is like a substantive change in the ordinance, or like several places in the ordinance, amendments of that nature. I'm talking about what the intent of this section is, right? Not opining on whether or not the language reflects that. So just as, someone who was in the room when this language is being phrased, this is what the conversation was around the table, which is that after the first year, we're going to revisit the MOU to just see like, what did we learn from the first year? What tweaks do we need to make and revise the MOU? And then from there on afterwards biannually. If there is an amendment to the ordinance or anything changes about the underlying like enabling law, that's going to precipitate a review automatically of the MOU that doesn't have to wait till a year or 2 years to pass. Now, and also I will add that both the county attorney as well as the COB's outside counsel reviewed this language as well. And both of them, approved the language. That being said, if you all feel strongly that the language needs to be amended to reflect the intent more clearly, you can collectively now, make an amendment, vote on like what you want that language to say, and then vote as a group to approve like the amended version of the MOU what would then need to happen, is that it would go to the other signatories and should they approve whatever the amendments are, then they would move forward with the process of, signing the MOU, which obviously is not gonna be as elaborate as a process as our amendment here because it's a public body, whereas all the other signatories are just one individual person. So I don't anticipate that being a long drawn out process. It would just be a matter of do the other signatories agree to what the amendments are? So that being said, obviously, if there's any language you feel very, very strongly about, and that would keep you all from being able to pass the MOU or have a majority vote, that's something that you all would need to come to, consensus on, but obviously it should be a very, serious or selective, language. You're not, at this point, not wanting to revisit or redraft, a majority of the language or like language in any particular section. I would just advise if it's like, something that's going to keep you all from being able to move forward.
So-
then that's something that you would want to maybe address there.
I want to add to that context that the MOU from the COB's perspective is minimally prescriptive, right? Our authorization, our existence, our operation is predominantly specified by the ordinance. The reason the readiness resolution hinges on an MOU with the police is we would be pretty defunct if we're sitting here just wishing and hoping that we can talk to the police and get them to give us data and participate in our conversations. And that's why we have spent a year creating a conversation space where we're able to have constructive dialogue with a group who, has existing protocols and authorities. And if this were to expire, is pretty able to continue doing what they're doing without oversight. So it may serve the COB to have continuity of something that's needs to be updated versus something that expires and has to be reauthorized. Because of what the consequences of losing agreement would mean for our readiness and our ability to conduct activities.
To
So
me, that's the very thing that would actually force the conversations though, because no one would want that.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
That's the stick in the whole thing. Is that the sunset provision would be, or a provision that made it more explicit that we had to sign again, that would be the thing that I believe would make sure everyone was at the table, anonymous brokers, at having a conversation again, because that's something we couldn't address. That's a nuclear option.
Okay. It occurs to me, we have deviated from our agenda and have been sitting here. Could I entertain a motion for a quick break? 3 to 5 minutes. Anyone interested in a break?
Motion breaker. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? We'll take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 8:25. Thank you.
You need the microphone. Ian?
Just exists now.
Thanks for being here.
Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Everyone in the room, online, from the public, COB, IPA, and staff. It is late. We're very, very, very grateful. Really important conversations. Charles, we left off, I think you had a few more items you wanted to reference.
Yeah, there's only three major sections that I had left to go through because we were able to hit on some of the things like the 30 days and how we kind of rode through some of the other areas. The next area was section 9, which is pages 20, 21, and it has to do with administrative filings. And something that we hit on, like, it's something that we hit on earlier, and it's just when in the process we give our recommendation on discipline, it seems as though it just falls too late in that process. And again, the fact that we have worked so hard to try to get ACPs to understand why it would be better to be early in that process so that a recommendation we have could actually be taken into account. I'm not sure again how this is worded. It just seems as though because our recommendation on discipline may come later in the process after the due process period for the particular officer may have been heard. And I remember our recommendation could be that maybe it's too hard. Maybe it's that, maybe that was way too hard, or maybe it should be softer. But the fact that that our recommendation arrives at a point after that due process point and after seemingly, and I may have misread it, the chief has made his determination, then it seems as though that even if the chief did agree with what we said, he'd be hamstrung as to be able to make any sort of change. So again, part of what our body should do, and I recognize it's not just ours. This is something from other jurisdictions that have COBs too, but we should be a way shower. And this is something that we should have been able to lead on in trying to make sure that we're more than just that what we say, there actually is a valid process by which the chief could have said, okay, and it not violate anyone else's due process. And again, that could just be my interpretation of it. So that's something, again, that, if there was more discussion on that, I think that would be good. The budget analysis part, that's page 24, section 13 about budget analysis. And this is just making sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot by limiting the budget items that we say we're going to talk about. We talk about speaking to just ACPD when it comes to policing, but I think in looking at the backgrounds of everybody here, it seems that everybody recognizes that there's a lot of other things that go into police, mental health, and just a lot of wraparound support services, and all these things hit outside of the ACPD budget. So that's one where we actually wrote ourselves into a box, and we may want to look at making sure, or just taking the prerogative, I'm sure no one would necessarily ding us, but making sure that we speak to more holistically when it comes to the budget to things that may affect policing that aren't necessarily ACPD. And then and if there's, okay, no other comment on that, then we'll, the last thing is, again, in page 26, section 16, again, those ACPD responses to reports, again, at just 30 days, just seems just very long, considering ACPD already has this information. We're literally using the information they have. Looking at the reports, it seems as though 30 days is too long to turn around. And then finally, what we've just been talking about, kind of the crux of this whole thing, which is 19, annual review of the MOU, and us really needing to have a language which will make sure that our better angels prevail. And we do have a conversation, a real conversation, and a hard discussion of amendments at a particular time. Crossing our fingers that, we do have changes, maybe, legislatively or an ordinance, but again, nothing is a foregone conclusion when it comes to that. Political winds change. So to be able to put in a hard, let's stop, let's review, let's sign again, I think that in the end will actually do better for this ordinance and better for this committee.
One comment on the within 30 days.
Yeah.
Okay, the word within means from 1 to 30.
Right.
And I think by taking an approach, it's almost like we're assuming they're going to go to 30 days. And this is where I say we're going to learn a lot this first year. And I say, let's learn. Maybe they do them within 5 days.
Right.
So to kind of automatically
You don't
take
even
a,
like-
yeah, I don't want to take a, scorched earth mentality
Right.
and call them bad, because now that's kind of what I'm doing. So within says, hey, maybe they have this investigation, and all of a sudden something bigger comes up. They have a fire or some really big bang here, knock on wood, if it doesn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
But this gives them the leeway that if it gets reprioritized because they have a bigger thing, they still can stay within the MOU. That's how I look at within 30 days.
Well,
And this is gonna be learning.
Yes.
as far as trust building goes, we do have some record of interaction with the police, and they have been very timely in not just providing information to us, but to the public about their activities. So I think, Charles, that's a really important point of policy. I actually think all of your comments set a really nice policy research agenda for our subcommittee. And I also hear that that is a priority for us. Do we have additional comments on the draft MOU? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to vote on the current draft of
Can
the
I
MOU.
make a motion to amend? MOU? You can. Okay, so my suggested amendments would be that, we be explicit that in a year we'll renegotiate. Just the first year, not forever, just the first year.
So it
And
currently
my-
says that, but I think what the language you want to change is not, is to go further than just review, but to like require revisions at the 1 year mark.
To re-sign it somehow, to re-authorize it, to whatever the correct way of putting it would be.
It sounds like there's like a strong possibility that the ordinance. is-
Yeah, I mean, I think that
That would-
it's superfluous because we're gonna end up doing it anyway. But I think that putting it in there sends a signal about that there are issues that people care about and we want to try and see if we can improve. And we will make a commitment to try and do that.
Yeah, that's also recognizing what we heard from NAACP. They've given us some things that we actually think that we need to look at. I think it's almost like acknowledging the public comment we've had thus far.
Yeah,
That's kind of what this is to me, that suggestion.
I'll entertain a second motion to amend.
Second that, if with the precise language to be.
We gotta figure out what the process language is, that's all we want explicit.
Mommy, do you kind of get the gist?
I'm working.
So if I can raise that point, in the last 5 words of that sentence is to determine if amendments are necessary. Are we not saying that we have the opportunity to make amendments if we feel they're important, thus requiring another review, or thus requiring another signature?
The difference is that, say we feel there should be a change, but ACPD doesn't feel that there needs to be a change. I mean, I think it just forces everybody to the table. That's the reason.
But
I think
But it does
with
say
opportunity,
shall be
there is
conducted by the
risk.
signatories. I mean,
There is risk, there's
But-
certainly risk.
But it gives us,
What if we said the MOU shall be renegotiated if there's a change in the ordinance?
No, but that has to happen anyway, that's.
So that happens anyway?
Yeah, that has to happen anyway.
I mean, I think if you're assuming that that's gonna happen anyway, because the language is implied, then it's the same thing for when you review the MOU at the 1 year mark, it's implied that we're all gonna come back to the table. So if you're going to make an amendment to be more explicit about requiring parties to come to the table, if any party deems that amendments are necessary at the 1 year or biannual Or in the event that the underlying enabling ordinance changes, then you might as well make it clear across all fronts that in any of these circumstances, all parties are required to come back to the table. But I go back to my original point to agree with you, Jim, that it's implied in the language and that it's been reviewed by the county attorney and outside counsel. And, you know, the signatories have an understanding that in any of those instances, whether it's the annual review, changes in the underlying legislation or ordinance, that we would need to come back to revise them.
I guess the other color to that element of the MOU is it is not a legally enforceable document. So it in and of itself is predicated on our mutual agreement with the police, and both both the COV, the MOU, and all signatories to the document have had in-depth conversations to this version that represent not necessarily a balance of equilibrated trade-offs, but a willingness to participate collaboratively. So I think sort of to our earlier comment about some of this is included by reference to other legally binding statute authority or ordinance authority. I think it's possible that to implement more definitive language for a non-binding document can erode some of the goodwill required to create an agreement at all. Right? Like it's a memorandum of understanding. And I think that the spirit of the annual review reflects the concerns I've heard. So that doesn't preclude an amendment to make it more specific. That's just to reflect that I think our interest in building operational collaboration requires us to have some trust embedded in the document itself, which is just hard. It's very difficult to trust a not legally binding document that's slightly ambiguous in that way. So
I just want to clarify what you said as far as you said that the document is legally enforceable. It's a binding document upon the parties.
it's not a legally
It's
enforceable
not
document.
legally binding.
Right. But it is
Binding is predicated on the understanding parties participating in the understanding as stipulated by a memorandum. The legally binding authority here is that the local ordinance requires the COB, the MOU, the IPA, the county board, and the county manager to have come to a basically good faith specific agreement about how we will conduct these activities. Our authorization to continue doing work and the police's willingness to participate in the way that we've stipulated isn't legally mandated by this document. This is our collective agreement that this is how we are going to initialize our collective involvement. So that doesn't really answer a question. It's just how I see sort of initializing a memorandum of understanding with a group of 5 people who are all sort of hinging on a reasonable interpretation of this in action. And since we have no action, it's really hard. I mean, like if we go back and we want to argue how many days, then maybe that creates a situation where that's the number of days it takes, where within 30 days is just an upper bound and we get a response the next morning because we have a very diligent and, interested staff partnership in our communication relationship. Our team.
I make a motion.
Yeah.
Motion to vote on the MOU as is.
I'm sorry, was there a vote on the motion to amend?
Okay,
I didn't
so we
hear
have
about that.
we have a motion to amend, we have a second.
We don't really have language. It's just that a sense that that right now we just have a sense that there should be language that is more explicit about um, negotiating changes. Right now, what we have explicitly here is determining that that amendments are necessary. So that's someone saying, hey, guess what? Ordinance change, are amendments necessary? Maybe, yeah. Done. Okay, they're necessary. That's what we have on paper.
So the motion on the floor is specifically if this commission wants to vote to amend the language regarding section 19, the annual review of the MOU. If there is a majority vote to do that, then we could go into discussion about what that amendment should be, what that language should be, and then you all would vote on the amended language. If a motion does not carry to amend the language, then it would be appropriate for you to make a vote to vote on it as it stands.
Can I just say one thing? First of all, I'm not on my sword on this.
Mhm.
But if we're already saying that it's already implied, then there shouldn't be a problem with being more explicit. It's already implied. What's the problem with being more explicit? I think that the value of being more explicit is really more of a signal to the community. I mean, community hasn't had a lot of input into this particular document. It just sends a signal that we are on a learning path for a year, part of which is going to be hearing from the community, and we make commitment within a year, we're gonna renegotiate it. You know, if we find, and undoubtedly we will, that there are things that could be improved upon. Again, I'm not falling on my sword on this. That's just my reason, but.
So we have a motion to amend and we have a second. All in favor of amending section 19, say aye.
Aye.
Three. All opposed? Aye. Any abstentions? Motion does not carry.
Motion to vote on the MOU amendments.
Do I hear a second?
Second motion.
All in favor of passing the MOU as is, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll vote present.
The motion to approve the MOU as is passes. We have one more element on our agenda that would be valuable, and then I think we can probably vote to adjourn before the outreach plan. I'm gonna, having passed the MOU, I'll read the readiness resolution quickly. Resolution for the Arlington County Law Enforcement Community Oversight Board. Whereas the Arlington County Law Enforcement Community Oversight Board, COB, was created by the Arlington County Board with the adoption of Chapter 69 of Arlington County Code in July of 2021. And whereas the Arlington County Board appointed the initial members of the COB in March of 2022. And whereas the COB has established its practices, procedures, and through the adoption and subsequent approval of the Arlington County Community Oversight Board bylaws in October of 2022. And whereas the COB is sufficiently staffed by the Office of Independent Policing Auditor, and whereas each member of the COB has completed their required training, including 8 hours of training presented by the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, 11 training courses from Arlington County staff on county procedures and ethics standards, Freedom of Information Act requirements, and race, equity, diversity, and inclusion training, 30 hours of training from the Arlington County Police Department, 3 ride-along sessions, and 6 hours of additional training from the Independent Policing Auditor and other relevant subject matter experts as required by Arlington County Code 60, subsection 69.6.7. And whereas the COB has adopted the memorandum of understanding between the COB and the Arlington County Police Department pursuant to Arlington County Code 69-2C. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the COB has met all obligations required by Arlington County Code 69.9A and is hereby indicating its readiness to take on The responsibility is assigned to it by Chapter 69 of the Arlington County Code, conditional upon the execution by all required signatories and approval by the Arlington County Board of the aforementioned memorandum of understanding. Signed, Julie Evans, Chair. Today, this date, the 19th of April, 2023. I'm going to sign. On the readiness. Okay.
To adopt the readiness resolution real quick.
I will entertain a motion to adopt the readiness resolution that was just read.
I so moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Count Lisa. Motion carries. Thank you. Now I will, because we haven't completed the agenda, entertain a motion to adjourn before addressing the other scheduled items, outreach plan discussion. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Any second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you, everyone, for your time this evening, especially online, for staying with us, and in person for making the trip. We really appreciate having you here, and we welcome you back at any time. Please. I hope some of the snacks that Mommy very graciously.
Sign it with the blue. and-
Congratulations, everybody.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Dave, for sticking it out.
Yeah, no, man. Good, so, and the outreach stuff is super important.
We're gonna do a subcommittee meeting that's all virtual.
Fantastic. All right.
I'll send some, other updates on the email. I have,
Hey, Charles.
oh, okay.
Good job.
Wait, I gave you.
So we do.
Stuff.
You're writing with it at first.